Since the early days of comics, superheroes represented the descendants to the classic tales of legend. Yet in 1970, DC Comics received a new pantheon of gods: Highfather, Darkseid, Orion, and Mr. Miracle, all created by Jack Kirby. The new gods were born.
You know, when people talk about Jack Kirby, you know, you start to cover such an intensely brilliant body of work.
Jack Kirby's story, I think for this purpose, starts at the Fleischer Studios. He was a very young animator. That was before he touched comics. He went from there to become one of the very first generation of comic book artists, and probably in partnership with his then partner Joe Simon, the first star talent in our business.
Born Jacob Kurtzberg, New York City, August 28, 1917. He was commonly known by his pen name, Jack Kirby. Widely known to fans as Jack King Kirby.
He made it all about composition and about layout. And he embraced the fact that he could have bold colors on top of each other but still make something dynamic. He started experimenting with things like how panels were placed, that you could have different sizes here and there, that you could have some action sprawl across 2 pages. He would play with a sound effect balloon becoming the panel, outlining the panel, something like kaboom becoming the panel itself as you see a character hit. People just didn't do that before.
There are so many places and so many ways you can highlight his career. You forget that he was around in the 40s. You forget that he was part of a team that first introduced Captain America. You don't realize that he was part of the resurgence of comics with the introduction of Fantastic Four.
He was an incredibly hardworking, energetic artist, and he was always pushing the limits.
He was a celebrated artist who co-created with Stan Lee some of the most popular Marvel comics before ultimately leaving in 1970 to work for rival DC.
This was the equivalent of a trade for Babe Ruth or the ultimate free agent signing in comic books. And to have him come over and not only to do 1 but 4 titles simultaneously, writing and drawing, at a point that one person could make a true difference on the line, is pretty spectacular. For me, New Gods was probably the first work that I identified clearly as Jack Kirby.
I was reading these comics when they came out. I was a comics fan. I was in art school at the time. When it came out, I think there were 3 issues of Jimmy Olsen, and then the books began to roll out 1 every 2 weeks. There was 4 books, they were bi-monthly, and they came out in a rolling order. What that meant was, instead of getting a straight storyline about whatever the adventure was, what you got was a braided storyline, basically a patchwork that gradually filled in over time.
Yeah, the first thing he does when he arrives here is to do something that breaks every rule of comics up until that time. It looks commonplace now, but no one had ever created a comic that interlocked 3 or 4 different publications from the launch. The idea of building a complete universe and launching different characters whose destinies fit together hadn't been tried in comics. This was an astounding moment for comic fans.
Kirby wanted to locate a way to make his work unique. He looked for a common theme among the different comic books being produced, something which unified all the work.
The idea of the New Gods is that there was originally a race in the DC universe who were so old and powerful that they eventually became known as the Old Gods by other races. They had a war during an age called the Third World that blew up their planet, the god planet Urgund. That sector of space was so wrecked by these cosmic forces that it became removed slightly from the rest of the universe. It was slightly out of phase of reality. The remains of this planet, which was orbiting the same star, then formed into two new planets. One was very lush and full of life that became New Genesis. The other was a barren wasteland that became Apocalypse.
Heavily inspired by the stories of early mythology, Kirby reached into the Norse legend of Ragnarok, a series of events which told of the death of the major gods. From the smoldering ruins of this battle emerged Kirby's new pantheon, forged through bloodshed and infamy.
On Apocalypse, there was a guy, Uzas, who was the son of its ruler, Yuga Khan, and Hegra. He eventually rose to power. He had his brother Drax killed in a process by which he got the powerful Omega Force. And in doing so, he became now the stone-like god, Darkseid.
Darkseid is the heir to the throne of Apocalypse, the world of evil. Highfather is the heir to the throne of New Genesis, the bright and shining world. And as young men, they come into conflict with each other through, in part, a scheme that Darkseid has set up. Highfather's wife is killed. The planets come to miserable levels of war with each other. Cosmic destruction between good and evil. Now the rulers of their respective worlds, Highfather and Darkseid, make the pact. They agree that there'll be a time of peace, and as hostages, they give their sons to each other to raise.
When the pact broke down, the two sons of the Titans, Orion and Scot-Free, rebelled against their surrogate fathers in an attempt to locate the truth to their existence. The father and son struggle tore apart the universe of New Genesis and Apocalypse.
New Gods from the very first page was about the greater-than-life characters. You know, it really is the concept, and the title, New Gods alone, pretty much explain what they are and what they're about.
It is a really interesting mix of like science fiction concepts and basic mythology, you know, Earth mythology, and a big heaping helping of biblical elements.
He saw the whole world of the fourth world taking place after Ragnarok. The last Yuga had ended, the universe had gone with it.
He chose to present the war to the reader at 4 different levels of involvement, of engagement. The first level, the New Gods, was the war seen from the point of view of the major warriors, the major gladiators at the god level who did really the down and dirty fighting. The Forever People, next book in line, is the war seen from the point of view of the children of the gods. For them, the war was an adventure, and it was high adventure. It was an adventure that was dangerous, which they understood, could cost them their lives. Their lives were at hazard a number of times over the run of that book, but it was adventure with a capital A. And in Jimmy Olsen, the 4th book that Jack did, we see the war from the mortal point of view. We really see it as it devolves down to a level of ordinary people, well, relatively ordinary, on Earth, and how it affects them.
I think in the fan world, it was one of the most exciting things of the period.
This was a saga to him, a modern mythology.
As war erupted, Darkseid would use every ounce of conflict to rip the life from all that is good.
Darkseid's single motivation is to make sure that not only just his world, but the entire universe subjugates to his will.
In Kirby's work, he was so beautifully written. His scenes with Desaad, his scenes with Forever People, even the scenes with Orion. He's completely cool. He's completely, as a good villain should be, he's completely after or focused really on what he wants. In his case, what Jack came to refer to as the anti-life equation.
Difficult to quantify, the anti-life equation was designed to showcase Darkseid's intelligence. Darkseid realized that if humans exist with life, then anti-life must be present as the balance. And somewhere in there was the key to his control of every living being.
My sense as a reader of the early stories was that Jack's view was the anti-life equation was just the cessation of freedom of thought, freedom of choice, the idea of being a pure drone in the worshipful army of Darkseid. And Darkseid believed it was hidden in the minds of humans on Earth, and in the early stories tried to use a number of different methodologies to kind of tease it out.